The complete works of Swami Vivekananda, Karam Yoga, Chapter 7, Freedom, Part 3. Here are two ways of giving up all attachment. The one is for those who do not believe in God or in any outside help. They are left to their own devices. They have simply to work with their own will, with the powers of their own mind and discrimination, saying, I must not be attached. For those who believe in God, there is another way, which is much less difficult. They give up the fruits of work unto the Lord. They work and are never attached to the results. Whatever they see, feel, hear, or do is for Him. For whatever good work we may do, let us not claim any praise or benefit. It is the Lord's. Give up the fruits unto Him. Let us stand aside and think that we are only servants obeying the Lord, our Master, and that every impulse for action comes from Him every moment. Whatever thou worshippest, whatever thou perceivest, whatever thou doest, give up all unto Him and be at rest. Let us be at peace, perfect peace with ourselves, and give up our whole body and mind and everything as an eternal sacrifice unto the Lord. Instead of the sacrifice of pouring oblations into the fire, perform this one great sacrifice day and night, the sacrifice of your little self. In search of wealth in this world, thou art the only wealth I have found. I sacrifice myself unto thee. In search of someone to be loved, thou art the only beloved I have found. I sacrifice myself unto thee. Let us repeat this day and night and say, nothing for me, no matter whether the thing is good, bad, or indifferent. I do not care for it. I sacrifice all unto thee. Day and night, let us renounce our seeming self until it becomes a habit with us to do so, until it gets into the blood, the nerves, and the brain, and the whole body is every moment obedient to this idea of self-renunciation. Go then into the midst of the battlefield with the roaring cannon and the din of war, and you will find yourself to be free and at peace. Karam Yoga teaches us that the ordinary idea of duty is on the lower plane. Nevertheless, all of us have to do our duty. Yet we may see that this peculiar sense of duty is very often the great cause of misery. Duty becomes a disease with us. It drags us ever forward. It catches hold of us and makes our whole life miserable. It is the bane of human life. This duty, this idea of duty, is the midday summer sun which scorches the innermost soul of mankind. Look at those poor slaves to duty. Duty leaves them no time to say prayers, no time to bathe. Duty is ever on them. They go out and work. Duty is on them. They come home and think of the work for the next day. Duty is on them. It is living a slave's life, at last dropping down in the street and dying in the harness like a horse. This is duty as it is understood. The only true duty is to be unattached and to work as free beings. To give up all work unto God. All duties are His. Blessed are we that we are ordered out here. We serve our time. Whether we do it ill or well, who knows? If we do it well, we do not get the fruits. If we do it ill, neither do we get the care. Be at rest, be free, and work. This kind of freedom is very hard thing to attain. How easy it is to interpret slavery as duty. The morbid attachment of flesh for flesh as duty. Men go out into the world and struggle and fight for money or for any other thing to which they get attached. Ask them why they do it. They say it is a duty. It is the absurd greed for gold and gain, and they try to cover it with a few flowers. What is duty after all? Is it really the impulsation of the flesh, of our attachment? And when an attachment has become established, we call it duty. For instance, in countries where there is no marriage, there is no duty between the husband and wife. When marriage comes, husband and wife live together on account of attachment. And that kind of living together becomes settled after generations. And when it becomes so settled, it becomes a duty. It is, so to say, a sort of chronic disease. When it is acute, we call it disease. When it is chronic, we call it nature. It is a disease. So when attachment becomes chronic, we baptize it with high sounding name of duty. We strew flowers upon it, trumpet sounds for it, sacred texts are said over it, and then the whole world fights, and men earnestly rob each other for this duty's sake. Duty is good to the extent that it checks brutality. To the lowest kinds of men who cannot have any other ideal, it is of some good. But those who want to be Karam Yogis must throw this idea of duty overboard. There is no duty for you and me. Whatever you have to give to the world, do give by all means, but not as a duty. Do not take any thought of that. Be not compelled. Why should you be compelled? Everything that you do under compulsion goes to build up attachment. Why should you have any duty? Resign everything unto God. It is tremendous fiery furnace where the fire of duty scorches everybody. Drink this cup of nectar and be happy. We are all simply working out of His will and nothing to do with rewards and punishments. If you want the reward, you must also have the punishment. The only way to get out of the punishment is to give up the reward. The only way of getting out of this misery is by giving up the idea of happiness, because these two are linked to each other. On one side there is happiness, on the other there is misery. On one side there is life, on the other there is death. The only way to get beyond death is to give up the love of life. Life and death are the same thing, looked at from different points. So the idea of happiness without misery or of life without death is very good for schoolboys and children. But the thinker sees that it is all a contradiction in terms and gives up both. Seek no praise, no reward for anything you do. No sooner do we perform a good action that we begin to desire credit for it. No sooner do we give money to some charity than we want to see our names blazoned in the papers. Misery must come as a result of such desires. The greatest men in the world have passed away unknown. The Buddhas and the Christs that we have known are but second-rate heroes in comparison with the greatest men of whom the world knows nothing. Hundreds of these unknown heroes have lived in every country working silently. Silently they live and silently they pass away, and in time their thoughts find expression in Buddhas or Christs. And it is these latter that become known to us. The highest men do not seek to get any name or fame from their knowledge. They leave their ideas to the world. They put forth no claims for themselves and establish no schools or systems in their name. Their whole nature shrinks from such a thing. They are the pure Sattviks, who never make any stir, but only melt down in love. I have seen one such yogi who lives in a cave in India. He is one of the most wonderful men I have ever seen. He has so completely lost the sense of his own individuality that we may say that the man in him is completely gone, leaving behind only the all-comprehending sense of the divine. If an animal bites one of his arms, he is ready to give it the other arm also and say that it is the Lord's will. Everything that comes to him is from the Lord. He does not show himself to men, and yet he is a magazine of love and of true and sweet ideas. Next in the order come the men with more rajas or activity, combative natures, who take up the ideas of the perfect ones and preach them to the world. The highest kind of men silently collect true and noble ideas in others. The Buddhas and the Christs go from place to place, preaching them and working for them. In the life of Gautam Buddha, we notice him constantly saying that he is the 25th Buddha. The 24 before him are unknown to history. Although the Buddha known to history must have built upon the foundations laid by them. The highest men are calm, silent, and unknown. They are the men who really know the power of thought. They are sure that even if they go into a cave, close the door and simply think 5 true thoughts and then pass away, these 5 thoughts of theirs will live through eternity. Indeed, such thoughts will penetrate through the mountains, cross the oceans, and travel through the world. They will enter deep into human hearts and brains and raise up men and women who will give them practical expression in the workings of human life. These Sattvic men are too near the Lord to be active and to fight and to be working, struggling, preaching, and doing good, as they say, here on earth to humanity. The active workers, however good, have still a little remnant of ignorance left in them. When our nature has yet some impurities left in it, then alone can we work. It is in the nature of work to be impelled ordinarily by motive and by attachment. In the presence of an ever active providence, who notes even the sparrow's fall, how can man attach any importance to his own work? Will it not be a blasphemy to do so when we know that he is taking care of the minutest things in the world? We have only to stand in awe and reverence before him, saying, "Thy will be done." The highest men cannot work, for in them there is no attachment. Those whose soul is gone into the self, those whose desires are confined in the self, who have become ever associated with the self, for them there is no work. Such are indeed the highest of mankind. But apart from them, everyone else has to work. In so working, we should never think that we can help on even the least thing in this universe. We cannot. We can help ourselves only in this gymnasium of the world. This is the proper attitude of work. If we work this way, we will always remember that our present opportunity to work thus is a privilege that has been given to us. We shall never be attached to anything. Millions like you and me think that we are great people in the world, but we die and in 5 minutes the world forgets us. And the life of God is infinite. We can live a moment, breathe a moment, if this all-powerful one does not will it. He is the ever-active providence, all power in his and within his command. Through his commands, the wind blows, the sun shines, the earth lives, and death stalks upon the earth. He is the all in all. He is all and all in all. We can only worship him, give up all fruits of work, do good for its own sake, then alone will come perfect non-attachment. The bonds of the heart will thus break and we shall reap perfect freedom. This freedom is indeed the goal of Karam Yoga.